Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Janet Rosbeck. I am the Director of Alumni Relations and Volunteer Engagement at Baruch College. And I am just delighted to bring you tonight's presentation. Baruch College has had a long-standing CFO network, as we have a tradition of educating the best and brightest in finance. And just as the pandemic began, we started having conversations about broadening the impact, broadening the community of the CFO network, not just for our alumni who are CFOs. We have about 250 on our database, but also to those who are on the CFO track. And so tonight we are just thrilled to have 4 CFOs from 4 different industries to talk about their experiences over the last couple years, their predictions for the future, a little bit about the work that they do. If you are interested in getting involved with the CFO network, we have a LinkedIn group, which we will include the link in the chat. In terms of the chat, please feel free to post questions in the chat or direct message me. We plan to have a conversation for 50 minutes or so, and then we'll begin Q&A. Although if there's something that's really pertinent, I will jump in. So I respectfully ask you all to keep yourselves on mute. And I am delighted to introduce Steve Lipner, who is a Baruch College alum, as is all of our panelists. He is our moderator for the evening. He is the CFO of State Street Global Advisors. He is a co-chair of the Baruch CFO Network and a member of our Baruch College Fund Board of Trustees. Steve, we are so grateful for your time tonight, and I am going to spotlight you and let you take it away.
Janet, thank you very much, and thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to the CFO Network co-chairs and all of you, all of the attendees. I'm excited for today's agenda. I think you'll find it value added with some interesting insights. Just about myself, again, as Janet said, I'm a CFO for State Street Global Advisors, the 3rd largest global asset manager. I'm a proud alum. I did graduate in 1987 with my MBA. I met my wife there while she was pursuing her business degree. We now have 4 children, grown children. And my father also went to Baruch. So definitely proud legacy heritage with Baruch College. So why don't we do a quick round robin and let's introduce our panelists. So Rosalba, I will start with you, please. Just your background and your role, please.
Thank you, Steve. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you as well. I have a very warm spot in my heart for Baruch. So I'm Rosalba Messina, and I too am an alumni of Baruch College, and I got both my undergrad and my executive MPA at Baruch. I'm currently the Chief Financial Officer at Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. And I've really dedicated my career to serving the nonprofit community. And I've been doing that for over 25 years, both as a consultant serving the nonprofit community and also as an in-house Chief Financial Officer as well. Thrilled to be here with all of you and very excited for tonight.
Thank you, Rosalba. Justin, how about you next, please?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for everyone. It's also, just want to echo the last sentiment said. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I really enjoyed my my studies at Baruch. I'm sorry, let me introduce myself. My name is Justin G. I am a graduate of the Baruch Executive MBA program class of 2007. I've spent the last 20 years of my career leading corporate finance teams in the entertainment, media, and advertising sectors. And currently I am the CFO for Ziff Media, And that's a collection of online content, tech, and shopping sites, including PC Mag, Mashable, AskMen.com, and RetailMeNot.
Justin, thank you very much. And last but not least, Shan.
Hey, thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Janet, for coordinating all this. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Moore. I'm a class of 2004 from Baruch. The first year I joined was the opening of the vertical campus, I want to say in 2003. So fond memories, just like I'm sure all of us have of Baruch, of what I learned there, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Shan. Okay, so why don't we kick into a series of questions here? Rosalba, I'll start with you, please. If you could all tell us about what has it been like operating during a pandemic as a CFO. I think we all collectively learned a lot through our Baruch education, but I don't recall ever there being a lesson or playbook for how to operate in a global health crisis like a pandemic. So what's it been like for you?
Yeah, well, let me start out by saying, Steve, that I didn't have gray hair when this all started. So that'll give you a little bit of an idea. No, seriously. So let me start with the most obvious answer is that it was very stressful. It's been very stressful. It's been very challenging. I mean, there's no sort of sugarcoating that, right? But there's a few things that I feel were really important and that I learned in retrospect were really critical to have had prepared. And that is, always great to have great relationships with your vendors, because when there's supply chain issues, you can always sort of count on certain vendors if you have really good relationships with them. So that's one thing that was really helpful during that process. The other thing that's really helpful is to don't wait for a crisis to have a line of credit. Cash is king, particularly during a crisis. One thing that I found, in retrospect, that was really helpful was I like to build in contingencies in my budgets for the nonprofits that I work for. And even though those contingencies were not enough because there was nothing like this pandemic ever before, it certainly helped. And so that was really critical. Really important to always manage risk, not during the pandemic, but prior to a crisis. Really important to manage risk so that you can pivot a little bit easier when there is something like what we've been experiencing over the last 18 or so months. And we also learned a lot of new things, right? We didn't ever experience working remotely the way we have in the last 18 months. And so we're learning a lot of new things about that. We're learning that that's actually possible. And so now going to hybrid schedules is something else that's new. And we're learning a little bit more about that's really somewhat doable, even though there are some organizations that don't think it may be. So I'll let my colleagues chime in, but those are a few things that I can tell you were my experiences during these last 18 or so months.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rosalba. Shan, how about you? I mean, eBay, e-commerce. I mean, talk about volumes. I'm sure you've got a lot to share.
Yeah, it was frightening, right? At the beginning, there really was nothing, as Rosalba said, to prepare us for it. I'd echo a lot of the same things Rosalba said. We went through a very rigorous stress test, I'd say, of our balance sheet. What would happen if eBay didn't sell an item on the website for 3 months? I mean, literally to that level. What sort of lines of credit could we go tap on if we absolutely had to? I'll add, you'll learn who your friends are in the banking world, right? Because we weren't the only ones going to them and asking, how strong are you with our RCF, with our revolving credit facility? I'll say, the closest thing to me about it it's kind of interesting. I was with AIG during the financial crisis. So it's very, very different, obviously, in certain respects, but just from that enormous pressure and enormous stress that you may go through, right, when you're in that environment. And I think, for the people on our team, we've been proud, really, of how we've come out of it. Pressure is just a great laboratory and a great school. And so given this environment, we've really put our people through the stress test themselves, and they've come through. So that just personally has been really gratifying, I think, to see.
No doubt, Sean. I think we've all experienced war stories that we'll be boring our grandkids with one day. Justin, how about you?
I think it speaks volumes that eBay and PayPal are worried about running out of cash. So that was a bit surprising. But I had the I don't know if it's fortune or what would you call it, but I had the experience of actually working at two different companies during the pandemic. The one I'm at now and the one that I left. And the one that I left was an ad agency. Very niche focus on very specific markets in luxury and fashion and beauty. And that business did not do well. I mean, what I learned, I think, from the pandemic and what we saw was that if you're very industry focused and if you're focused on the wrong industry, like all those travel companies and airlines, it was really hard, a lot harder than for some other ones. Like when when I moved over to Ziff Media, 2020 was an awesome year, to be honest. Everybody was at home. Everybody was on the internet. Everybody was shopping. People were looking for content. And that is how we make money. We make money through traffic and, being able to monetize internet traffic. And there was just so much of it. Now, as we actually find now in 2021, as we kind of get to the latter half of 2021, where more people are kind of freeing themselves from their computers and actually leaving and going out to stores and movies and things like that and actually traveling again. And they're not shopping as much. And we have now also the problem of, supply chain. Our business isn't as strong in this fourth quarter as it was last year. So it's interesting how the pandemic has really kind of changed the economics of things. And having seen both sides of it, for me was quite fascinating.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, like you mentioned, we're facing the same thing. We've started tracking the Google mobility measure as a KPI, right? So as mobility increases, it's actually something, we're tracking as are all other e-com companies. So kind of interesting just how we're almost the opposite, right? Of how some of the other companies are dealing.
Right.
Yeah. And Shan, you bring up a really great point, because in the nonprofit world, you really don't talk a lot about KPIs, right? But it's actually something that we're tracking now. It's really, really critical. The other thing that I found, since this is a CFO network, that is really, really critical is to really make sure that you virtualize your finance functions. Because if we did not have that, we would not have been able to pivot the way we did during this pandemic. And so that's also really something that we learned.
Great point. Great points from all three of you. I'm going to share something quickly, just maybe more on the softer side, the employee softer side. State Street is a 200 plus year history. I mean, one of the oldest banks in the country, leading asset manager with a bit of a Wall Street sort of ethos. Over this pandemic time period, we got to know each other as employees and colleagues like we never had before, right? You go to work, very businesslike, you keep your distance to some degree, but when everybody's stuck at home and everybody's Zooming like we are right now, during the depths of the pandemic, all of a sudden the walls come down, people's vulnerabilities come out. Clearly a lot of suffering going on in the environment, and all of a sudden you're meeting spouses, you're meeting partners, you're meeting children on video, you're meeting pets. And there was a certain refreshing relaxation about it all, about getting to know each other. And I think that's a real positive that has stuck with us. And not surprisingly, employee engagement scores have never been so high, because employees are embracing the ability to work hybrid. And I think that model will change. We'll never get back to the way we were pre-February 2020 in terms of where we are working from. There'll be a mix. So I think there was some really interesting changes that will be permanent coming out of this. Let me transition to the next question here. So as you look back at your evolution as a finance leader, you're all CFOs here. How has the job changed? How has the actual substance of the job changed today relative to when you walked out of Baruch with that degree? Shan, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I was just reminiscing there a brief moment, Steve. I'd say what Baruch prepared me for was that sort of quantitative analytics skill, if you will. Yeah, meaning that I walked in, I joined AIG a few months after graduating, and it was in the quantitative risk department. And so at that time, it was just all about number crunching, right? And just making sure we ran the value at risk calculations for the derivatives book for the insurance company. And, you know, it was just very computationally intensive. So I look back on that, it's, you know, in retrospect, right, it always looks super clear, like there was always a plan to the career progression. But I think you have to start with that sort of expertise. What are you good at? Why are you at the table and chatting about things, right? What's that core base of knowledge? As I moved on, went to GE, which was really a school for managing and communications. You know, I won't know, it's probably not an overstatement to say a big part of my career trajectory has been learning PowerPoint skills at GE. Which was sort of the masters at putting that sort of communication set together. I did some sales with Bloomberg right after that, and now joined eBay. So it's just, I think, you know, once you get to a CFO level, you synthesize all of that, all the learnings, whether it's that quantitative background, that ability, you know, and the best CFOs I've worked with have had that ability to, you know, just know intuitively if the numbers make sense. You always have to start there, right? We're
So has it become, Shan, less nuts and bolts, which are a given, so blocking and tackling, as they say, but less nuts and bolts and less debits and credits and more strategic, more commercial in nature?
Absolutely, yeah. It's had to, and I think it's you have to do that as a partner to your business leader. Because that's what they'll rely on you for. And maybe, like Steve, exactly as you say, in the past, that may have been the history of this role, but that's not where the value add is today. Lots of people can do that blocking and tackling and know debits and credits. Where you could add value is to think a bit long-term and strategic.
Yeah. What do you think, Justin? How about you?
I agree with Shan on, you know, on a lot of that, on all those fronts. I mean, I think the communication part has definitely evolved since I left Baruch. You know, when I left Baruch, you know, I had, you know, taken a finance director role at an ad agency, you know, and over the years I kind of increased responsibility, you know, but as the responsibility increased, I had less control of the things I was responsible for. Yet, you know, I was still held highly responsible for them, right? So as the teams become bigger, you can't really control every single person and what they're doing, but it doesn't really matter because, you know, you're held responsible for the entire team, right? And that was something that I had to kind of wrestle with because I, you know, and you know, you ask anyone in my classmates in Baruch, I was a total control freak, had to control every project, had to do everything my way, you know, and you know, that worked for some folks, didn't work for many folks, but you know, but that kind of taking that kind of personality and then having to kind of, you know, lead departments where, you know, it was different. And then being able to kind of, you know, be able to really kind of break down, I think the business, explain it to people who may not understand finance as well, you know, as well as we do. You know, and I tend to work in these creative industries where we don't really have, you know, the CEOs and COOs or, you know, tend to be more creative people. You know, they aren't, you know, they didn't go to MBA school. You know, some of them went to art school. Some of them are, you know, are chief creative officers that, you know, put together amazing campaigns. or they might be, amazing technology people, but not necessarily have a lot of the finance grounding. So being able to kind of bridge that gap, I think, started to become a skill that I had to develop really quickly, because you need to kind of be able to kind of, explain to them, what's going on in the business.
So there's an education element, just given the space that you're in.
Yeah, definitely. Educating, your CEO, your partners, all the leadership, and having them understand what's going on within the business and being able to really explain that. I think, I've been fortunate to work with people who are very passionate about growing the business, but without direction, we'll probably go in 50 different ways, and you need to kind of bring them in and get them focused. And I think that's, as a CFO, I think that's been one of my primary responsibilities.
Thank you, Justin. So Rosalba, is the not-for-profit space any different, or everything that you've just heard from Anwar and from Sean and from Justin, is it just consistent?
I would say that it's fairly consistent. I would agree with what both Justin and Sean said. I think the pieces that I would add, I'll add an interesting twist. When I started out at Baruch, there were very few women CFOs, so I might not have been on this panel, right? So I think over the years, and I went to school at night, so it took me a really long time to get my degrees. So I think over the years, there's more, CFOs out there in the world, which is great. And so the only other thing I think I would add to what my colleagues have already said here is that for me, what I've learned over the years, it's really about demystifying financial information for different constituent groups, so that they can easily understand what it is you're trying to convey and what story you're trying to tell, right, with these numbers. I think that is something that was something that I really focused on as part of the communication piece, which I agree is very, very important.
Rosalba, I want to double click on a comment you just made.
Sure.
There were very few women CFOs. How is that changing now?
Well, I think it's changed tremendously. I mean, I started out many years ago in the nonprofit world and in the financial world, and it was just one of those things that when I started going to school, I was just getting straight A's in accounting, so it was just like learning another language for me. I was lucky that way, but I did not recall a lot of role models for me as a woman who was going to be entering that field. And so it certainly has changed. I mean, there are Fortune 500 companies now that have women CFOs. Not as many as men, but still we're getting there. And there's certainly many more nonprofits that have women CFOs.
Thank you. So next question here. When you think about your respective worlds here, what are your biggest business priorities? Do you tend to focus on top line strategic revenue growth or transformation of your expense base, or is it a combination of both? Where are you all collectively putting your efforts to from a strategic perspective? And Justin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's kind of everything. It's the whole P&L, but it's revenue growth, it's organic revenue, it's maximizing margin, profitability. But there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot outside of the P&L that impacts the P&L that we're focused on too, right? And that's talent, and that's retaining talent. And I think in this age where now I think we find that talent is far more mobile than they used to be, right? You don't have to. If you're interested in working for a position out in LA and you're based on the East Coast, you can do that because we've proven that, that works. You don't have to move your entire, life over there. And companies are being more flexible with that. And so, what we struggle with, for our companies, and I would suspect the same thing goes for Sean as well, being in that kind of tech sector, right, is that it's hard to find really good talent, right? And hard to find really good engineers, hard to find good salespeople. And that is a risk to the business because that's all, it's a talent. We're in that business where we're not really selling a thing. We don't have an inventory, right? So it's really just about the people that kind of, create the content for us, create, great sites, really good technology that, that drives our, that makes our the experience on our sites better. And so, for us, if you focus on the talent piece and if you can fix that issue, we think that, we can grow everything else, with it. And that's been kind of the strategy right now, kind of going forward. How do we do that? And I think that's a problem that I think a lot of companies are facing.
Yeah, well, there's a plug for our alma mater, everyone. There's some really good talent coming out of Baruch.
Absolutely.
Right? Rosalba, priorities, business priorities, all over the place, top line, expense base, transformation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Justin. It's all over. I mean, there are so many things that the pandemic has changed that on both sides of the P&L that we really have to be consistently looking at. I think for me, it's really a lot about scenario planning. Best case, worst case, medium case, all kinds of cases, right? So that's part of it. It's about all of a sudden, we had to close, health centers during COVID. And so we did telehealth. And so now we're going to try to keep telehealth, right? When we weren't doing them before. So things like that. On the revenue side, I mean, on the expense side, it's always about, analyzing expenses where you can reduce costs. What does it look like if we don't get a certain patient revenue numbers in. So it's always about that. And as I said before, cash is key, preserving cash is key, particularly for nonprofits where, we work on a zero profit margin, right? So.
Thank you. Shan, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting for us. We started this business, this payments business at eBay, and we've taken it. We just announced at the last earnings that it'll hit 2 billion of revenue this year. So it's gone from 0, 3-4 years ago, right, to 2 billion of revenue now. And so that was always our North Star. When we hit that number, that was the number we announced when we went on this journey a few years back. And then so now the question is, well, now what? We've done it. Where do we go next? So for us, the focus is what is that? What does payments allow us to unlock in terms of additional services or things we can offer our customers? How can eBay help our sellers who 19 million of them who sell on the platform? How can we help them thrive in this environment? And using our payments platform, we're excited about where that could land. So that for us has been absolutely the focus.
Yeah, it's good. It's an important focus. I mean, let me throw this out to anyone here. As we sit here, 18 months, roughly 18 months or so, since the start of the pandemic, is anyone here surprised by the resiliency of corporate America from a CFO perspective? I mean, I know, and I'll just say for myself, our business, our assets under management, we manage money for pension funds, endowments, not-for-profits, municipalities. I mean, it goes up and down with the markets. We're subject to the equity markets. We're really a risk-on organization. As those equity markets go up and down, that's a direct impact to our top line. And the first couple of months of the pandemic, March and April, we know what happened to the equity markets. They cratered about 30%. Then they came screaming back. And as we sit here today, the S&P 500 record highs every day. It's somewhere in the 4,700 range. Who knows? I'm shocked. I never would have predicted this. I think anybody who would have predicted this would be a bit of a liar. Is anybody surprised by this resiliency? I mean, if you look at corporate earnings, just record earnings.
I'd say, Steve, I'm surprised by the speed, right, of call it the recovery. I go back to the crisis. I never thought we'd get out of that, or that would be a much more drawn out, much more Great Depression-like outcome. And so based on that, you're to me, you're confident in sort of the recoverability of America, frankly. So that the fact that it happens, not a surprise. I'd say the speed was literally, it was measured in weeks, right? The recovery, if I think of back 18 months, that to me was even more surprising than I think coming out of the crisis.
You know, it's a little different for me in the nonprofit world because am I surprised? You know, we had resources that we could tap into that I think probably, you know, for-profit corporations didn't have. There were funds that were available. Let me backtrack a second. Similar to Justin, I've actually been with 2 different nonprofits during the COVID pandemic, and I was with a very large homeless service provider for the real emergency crisis part of the pandemic last year. And, you know, we had COVID funds that were available to us through the government that were really, really helpful. So I think, am I surprised? It was a little scary, you know, at first before we knew that we could tap into some of these resources. But I'm not ultimately surprised that we were able to make it through.
Yeah, I think I share the same sentiment. I don't think I'm not surprised by the markets. I don't know if the markets are the most perfect indicator of what's going on in reality, you know, to be honest. So where I think, you know, the markets may be doing phenomenally well, right? You still see pockets of America that are struggling through COVID. You still see jobs shifting around. You still see some unemployment. You do find that, you know, certain industries are having an impossible time trying to hire. So I think there's going to be kind of a reconfiguration of some sort that's going to have to happen, you know, to kind of reset the equilibrium where the market is growing, the economy is going to grow, but it's going to be different, right? So, and I'm curious to see and excited to see what, you know, how that's going to shake out. You know, our wages going to go up for you know, people in hospitality. I hope so, because we treat them like shit all the time. So, you know, we really should, you know, they should be, you know, paid better. You know, should what's going to kind of come out of that? And I think the markets are indicating that I think great things are coming, but I do think it's a bit of a leading kind of indicator at this point. I haven't really seen it here. You know, you guys are, a lot of you here in New York, you know, you see things kind of coming back to life. So I don't think that's indicative of every place, right? So, but it's coming, and so and I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and it's all good points. I mean, from my perspective, I just continue to be so surprised how seamless the work from home environment is, and even the hybrid environment. Some people are coming in. I'd say we're about getting close to about 50% on site, with 50%, maybe slightly less than that, working from home. There's some hybrid arrangements. Clearly, the technology is there to support this. I mean, a funny story, pre-pandemic, I remember, I think as we all know as CFOs, after compensation expense of our staff, the next biggest line item expense tends to be occupancy expense, office space, that sort of thing. One of the big ones, if not number 2 or 3, whatever. And I remember just going toe to toe with some of our business leaders trying to cut down on space. This is pre-pandemic, because my argument was, we don't utilize all our space. Some people are traveling. Some people did work from home pre-pandemic. Some people are ill. Some people are on holidays. Never did you have 100% of your space fully allocated. So I tried to advocate 120% occupancy. So there would be 100 seats for 120 people. That's the way the math would, and you'd be okay, because again, for a variety of reasons, you'd never have that full allotment of people coming in. And the arguments that ensued were just classic. Oh, that would never work, Steve. We don't have the technology. People need to be with people. We need to work side by side. We need to brainstorm. Well, sure enough, the pandemic happens. We're all adjusting beautifully. 120% occupancy, that's out the window, right? Let's shoot for 150% and upward, 100 or 200%. Obviously, it's a great time for CFOs to rationalize their occupancy footprint where it makes sense. So it's just, and that to me speaks to the resiliency. But let's build on this topic. What have we missed? What have you all missed during this pandemic? And I'm going to make an assumption that you have spent a fair amount of time, maybe up until recently, working from home. It looks like, Shannon, you're in the office right now in a nice cozy conference room, or a good one, I should say. But was anything missed from a finance perspective with your team members? What did you miss? Anybody, feel free to jump in.
Well, I think I can jump in. I mean, I think certainly at the very beginning, what was missed was the efficiency of working in a sort of collective space, right? When we had to ramp up because we had to get IT equipment and video equipment, whatever it was, there was lost time. So I think there was some lost efficiencies at the very beginning. Then when we got through that and we were still all remote, I think you do lose something not being face to face with people. I think
was collaboration missed?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think there's a difference. You know, there's body language you don't see on Zoom. There's a different eye contact you don't see on Zoom. I remember very recently, just a few months ago, going to the office with a number of staff for the first time, like all together. And I think some people like started crying because they were just so ecstatic, you know, to be in the same room and around the same conference table. So I think there is some sort of interpersonal piece that is missed over Zoom, which is why I kind of like the hybrid approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Justin or Shannon, anything to add?
I will say that since I started, you know, my current role in kind of this remote world where I had to kind of become the CFO and transition remotely, it was tough. I mean, that was a hard thing to do. To, you know,
so you were never in the office physically?
Not
versus Davis.
Not until many months later did I actually go back and, you know, actually meet my boss for the first time in person.
Wow.
It wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 months, you know, into the job. And so, yeah, so I had to start, you know, here at home trying to kind of learn about this organization and have, you know, the executive team kind of in different places. And yeah, we'd get on Zoom, but it's not the same thing. Like, we've had in-person meetings together, you know, now more frequently, and that is far more efficient, in my opinion, than having to kind of try to do this remotely. I mean, there is something about, you know, being together, and I don't want to be dismissive about, you know, that in-person collaboration. And I think as you onboard, you know, I think for anyone, I mean, you know, a CFO role, you know, might be one of the trickier ones to try to do, but in any role, really, as you try to onboard into an organization and doing it remotely, you know, understanding the culture, trying to, you know, build camaraderie or with your peers, it's more difficult. You know, it's offset somewhat by the flexibility of being able to kind of work at home and not having to commute and all that. But, you know, I do think it causes some challenges, you know, with trying to learn a new job.
I missed the whiteboard, Steve. I miss getting people together. And let's just talk through this, right? Zoom has a whiteboard feature. It's not very good, or at least I don't draw very well. So the first thing I kind of did when, you know, once we were settled in, you know, you forget, I forgot certainly that at the beginning we thought, oh, this is just a 2-3 week thing, right? It's not going to be that long. We'll be back at work pretty soon. And then once it became clear it wasn't, I set up the home office with a bit of a whiteboard, but still it's not the same because you've got to position the camera. So I know, when you asked the question, that was the first thing that popped in my mind, is just being able to have that ability, right, to draw things out and just spitball with people.
I feel like I haven't whiteboarded in a very long time. I was actually in my office this morning into the early afternoon, but came back here given the sort of later hour of the session. But that's a great point, Shannon. And I'll just add on to that. I just miss the informality, right? I miss the spontaneity. I miss walking by someone's office or cube and just kind of bouncing something off of someone, and let's all jump into a conference room and whiteboard it. Let's brainstorm. I mean, nothing's scheduled. Let's talk it out. Now everything is so formalized. It's so scheduled that we're all being Zoomed, from early morning to evening. And sometimes, when does the weekend? When does the weekend start? Same thing with evening and mornings. Things are getting blurry and things are organized, scheduled, and formal. Just even you got to pick up the phone now more than ever. So, and my biggest worry, and I don't think we'll know the answer in 6 months or 12 months, but I wonder if there'll be a product innovation letdown. I mean, my industry is so dependent upon product innovation for our clients. All of yours are, to a certain degree. We're meeting clients' needs, and I wonder 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, will we look back and say, we did persevere, we did well financially, equity markets went up, stock prices went up, but was there a drop off in innovation? We'll see. It's a fear. I know Janet, a couple of questions are popping in. I just have 2 more questions for the panel here. That's really going to connect I'd like the group to connect back to their Baruch experience and go back in time a bit here. When you think about your Baruch education, what lessons did you learn that you're still holding on to today that stand out, years later, in terms of applying it to what you're responsible for today in your day-to-day responsibilities? What if anything stands out? Shan, let me start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve. I think a good idea comes from anywhere. I grew up in New York, and so certainly no stranger, I don't think, to diversity in any respect. But certainly in an educational setting, Baruch was, if I think of my teammates on various projects from Israel and Turkey and Greece and Ghana, and, just a smart idea is a smart idea no matter where you're from. And so just not expecting that. So I've always, from my personal perspective, kept that, that there's nobody's background, who anybody is not going to be any barrier to them having a great idea. And it certainly helped me in my career as I've, kind of been able to, I think, hone in on that, where others, I don't think, have had that sort of luxury of that background because they've gone to, maybe less diverse schools or educational systems.
It's such a great point. What school better personifies diversity of its population than Baruch? And by the way, Baruch was like that in the late 80s when I was there, 90s, 2000s. It's not a new thing. That's the beauty and the power of Baruch, just being able to attract such a diverse population and have them succeed. Great point, Shan. Rosalba, how about you?
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons I actually wanted to attend Baruch, because I had read so much about the diversity of the student population. So that is a great point. You know, for me, besides the technical lessons, you know, during classes, for me, it was really all about the cohort model in our executive MPA program. We were 24, and 10 years later, after graduating, we are still on a Google group connected where we email back and forth. Can't say enough about leveraging that network. And the sort of lesson about growing your professional network is key, particularly during a crisis, because we're not the subject matter experts on everything. And so that lesson for me was great. And I love a shout out to cohort 28. I know some of them are on tonight. And that was really a huge, huge bonus for me, which I wasn't expecting when I was in the program.
You can't underestimate the power of networking. And I always use that if I'm talking to some young entry analysts that come into our organization. Just network. I didn't have that ability. We didn't have the internet back when I was getting my grad degree in the late 80s. There's some just great platforms and tools available because that network comes in handy during all sorts of life situations. So just network. Thank you, Rosalba. And Justin, I mean, what lessons have you taken from your Baruch education that you're applying today?
Yeah, so when I think back to the most important lessons I've learned, I think back to this corporate strategy class that I took with a Professor Das. And just so you know, Professor Das was a mean son of a bitch, and he was a hard professor, and he was, no one really liked him very much, to be honest. You know, very old school, kind of yelled at you a lot, kind of said implied that you weren't really that smart. And
how did you do in that? How did you do in that class, Justin?
I got an A, but you know, there was a lot of hardness. Yeah.
Okay.
But you know,
I thought you were setting us up for something different.
Well, you know, well, still, it was a hard A to get, but but anyway, so you know, I went to an executive MBA program, right? And so we had a lot of people there who were somewhere in their mid-careers, they weren't just right out of grad school. And he said, Professor Das had said something, that stuck with me for stuck with me forever. And he said that, as you reflect on your long careers, you should ask yourself if the 10 to 15 years of experience you have at your job is really just 1 year of experience multiplied 10 to 15 times. And I thought about that. And I was like, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? And, and I took that and I really did kind of really think about that. And, I was at a role where I was there for 7 years. And was it 7 years of experience, or was I just doing this the same thing 7 times year over year? And for me, that was kind of one of those points of, if you want to kind of, move on, and if you want to grow, you really have to push yourself. And that's when, I decided that after I got my MBA, I was going to leave that, a very comfortable role at a very reputable company and start something completely new in an industry that was completely new to me. And, for what it's worth, I kind of failed the first year, but then by year 2, really started to understand and, kind of really started to grow. And so I think that, as everyone kind of thinks about their roles and whether or not, they've kind of grown complacent with what they're doing, it's time to reevaluate. When I look at resumes, I don't necessarily judge people if they've kind of jumped around. I don't necessarily think that's a terrible thing, especially if you're early on in your career and you're just trying to kind of, find what's right for you. And if you're challenging yourself, and a lot of times people get bored with things and they move on and they try different things. And I respect that. And I think that, to me was a really, important lesson. And I, continue to do that. And it's kind of where I ended up now in an industry that is a bit different than what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And it's been a hard, couple of months, but I think I've grown leaps and bounds, in these last 6 months, in terms of capabilities and skills and knowledge than I could have in the last 5 years of what I've been doing before.
Great example from Professor Das, is it?
Yes, Professor Das. Yeah.
Great example. I mean, complacency should be an alarm bell. And for me to answer my own question, what lessons have stayed with me, back in the mid to late 80s when I was in school getting my MBA from Baruch, the concept of social responsibility was really in its infancy. Today, as we sit here today, it's all about ESG, and we're all living it. It's becoming part of our DNA as organizations, rightfully so. Environmental, social, and governance, climate change, COP26, it's everywhere. And companies are responding to do the right thing. A little bit different back in the mid 80s. And I had a professor, Professor Sethi, who ran corporate social responsibility classes at the time. The Union Carbide tragedy incident happened at that time in the 80s in Bhopal, India, where the chemical plant spewed, poisonous gases, and hundreds were killed as a result. And it was a wake-up call to the corporate world to start taking responsibility and doing the right thing. And I was a young student back then, and those lessons sit with me today. And it's great just to see it being applied in the form of ESG today. There's no turning back. So I always look back to at that point when the concept at least was born in my mind. So last question, because I know Janet's got a bunch of questions from the audience. I see them coming in. What advice would you give to a recent Baruch graduate, a couple years out of school, that wants to be in your seat, wants to be a CFO in a not-for-profit or for-profit? Rosalba, how about you first, please?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question, Steve, is try every accounting job first, right? So, I think I did every sort of aspect of accounting. I was in accounts payable, accounts receivable, general ledger reporting, treasury. I think I did all of it before I became a CFO. And I think the reason for it is obvious. Then you'll know what it takes to do that job. That was really a key piece for me in becoming a CFO, because I could really understand when someone came to me and said, I really can't do this because blah blah blah. So I think that's the first thing I would say. Depending on where you are in your career, obviously, but that would be one of the first things I would say is try different aspects of accounting so that you really have that experience under your belt. There was another point that I was thinking of. Well, frankly, the other thing I would say is, take the curriculum at Baruch. If you're not already alumni.
Great call out.
I guarantee you will not be disappointed for many, many reasons, the technical aspects and the sort of networking aspects. It's a great program. I was in the public affairs program. So I would say I would use that as a recommendation as well. Get really well versed in communications and public speaking, because the days of CFOs being the the green visor on and crunching numbers is really over. We are a very strategic part of an executive leadership team. And it's really, really important that you're able to communicate to different constituents across the board. And that, I think, will really help you along the way. So those are the pieces.
Great point. The great point on communication. I always tell our staff members, it's a lot harder to be crisp and concise. Mm-hmm. Write that paper, the shorter the better. Yep. No, we're all busy. We all get inundated our inboxes with stuff. The shorter, the crisper, the better. Make your point quickly.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I will say that when I started out, I used to be a nervous wreck giving financial presentations. Literally, I would be shaking. So practice, because clearly now I can speak to, in public.
You do it very well.
Thank you.
Shan, how about you?
Yeah, I think for CFO roles especially, you've got to have the reputation and act with just the utmost integrity at all times. I mean, I always say this to my team that I've never gone wrong in my career doing the right thing. Something, regardless of the pressure, regardless of whatever it is, you just cannot. That's something that's just non-negotiable to always have there. And if you start from that perspective, then feels like the rest of it sort of follows on. If you're a little intelligent, can work hard and are ambitious, the rest typically will fall in place.
I mean, great point. I mean, in my company, we call it risk excellence. We're CFOs, it's about the integrity of the financials. It's doing the right thing. It's about being the conscience. So solid point, Sean. Justin, what would you tell that new Baruch grad who wants to be the CFO for Ziff Davis?
Well, on any given day, I'd probably shake him by the collar and go, "Are you out of your mind? You want to be a CFO?" But those are the toughest. But listen, I think it's a fantastic role. I think, as Rosalba said, it is about being strategic, and having that ability to communicate. It's not necessarily about the number crunching. So I think, for me, if I was to give any, piece of advice, it's to read a lot. And I know that might sound strange, but I think reading is like fundamentally one of the most important things that you can do. And it doesn't have to be about business. And please don't read like Who Moved My Cheese. I mean, not those kind of crappy things, but really interesting books that, really challenge you about how you think and how you can be a manager. Like the best, and I swear to God, the best business book I've ever read was called Team of Rivals: The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. And it was, by, a very famous biographer, Doris Kearns Goodwin, right?
Goodwin, yep.
Yeah, yep. Wrote an amazing book about Abraham Lincoln and his leadership and how he had like cabinet that was full of his political enemies and how he had to navigate that and the Civil War all at the same time. And had, and was a very humble president, and you read it and you go, well, how do I take that and apply to, myself, and how do I lead like that? And I think, reading is incredible, and really important. Another book, Bad Blood, which was the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos scandal, right? Teaching you about ethics, because as a CFO, you are the moral fiber of the organization, okay? And you need to understand that, there is no gray here, right? I mean, there is no fudging things. It is what it is. And sometimes you have to make that hard call, and I think it was that book clearly demonstrated kind of going kind of that opposite direction, where never to go. And I thought that was a fascinating story. And then finally, the motto that I live by, which I would, encourage people to kind of think along the track, is that I never lose. I win or I learn. And I think that's, to me important, because, I know there's a lot of times I don't win, but every time that, I don't, I try to, learn from that. And I think, as you go through life, especially as the, younger people, you're not going to win, but I don't think you should view it as losing at all. And I think that, what you can do from that, those points is kind of learn from that, and build from that. And that'll get you there. It'll get you anywhere, to be honest. So that's what I tell my kids, and, hopefully they'll listen to me, but who knows?
Yeah. I mean, great examples. It's okay to take some risk. You're not going to win all the time, but you're going to learn from those times that you don't, and you'll apply it in the future. And I like the moral fiber. Great line. That's what we are. No one wants to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
No, you don't.
I don't look good in all.
Yeah.
So thank you. Great panel. Good diversity of thought here from different backgrounds. Janet, can I turn it back to you? Because
absolutely,
we did see questions coming in.
Yes, we have a number of questions. Some are technical, others are a little bit philosophical. So The first one is back to the topic of talent. And from a practical perspective, are any of your organizations having a mandate for vaccinations? But on a broader perspective, now with this hybrid workforce, what processes or programs are being evaluated or put into place to avoid a phrase I had not heard before, a two-tier employee base? So are you finding that your employees that there's the possibility of having that two-tier employee base? So first, vaccination, and second, any special ways to keep everybody on the same page? And Steve, why don't you start?
So I would say in terms of mandated vaccine, we are going down that approach. I think when the president of the United States declares a mandate in that area, obviously you've got the right air cover to ensure that you follow and do the right thing. So absolutely, we're actually in the process now of uploading proof of vaccination. And there may be some exceptions to the rule, whether it's religious exceptions or medical exceptions, but we're taking a very firm stance.
Okay, and what about the two-tier hybrid structure? Have you seen anything like that within your organization?
Not really, not yet, not to that degree. Might be in a better place to comment 6 months from now or so.
Right.
But I can't say that I have.
Okay.
I'll let others comment.
Okay, Shan, vaccination.
We are same as I think State Street. We'll be mandating, or at least I don't think it's the words mandate the vaccine. It's more a requirement for returning to office. And oh, by the way, we would like people to return to the office. Just from the hybrid, I think it's kind of interesting, just because there is always, I think with any international company, there's always this idea, right, of where HQ is versus where some of the international locations are. I think with eBay, for example, even we're headquartered in San Jose, but we do have some finance functions in Austin, and international businesses in London, in Germany, in Australia. So there's always this sort of push and pull, right? Well, if I'm not in HQ, am I near the sun, kind of thing? And it feels like that might get exacerbated just a bit, in as much as there is more of this hybrid structure. So I think same as Steve, we'll see how that works out. Hopefully it does go down the line of historically how it's been with any international org, where we can learn to sort of navigate through that.
Okay, Justin.
So we haven't mandated it yet. We've debated it, and the debate goes back and forth because where our offices are located, we're already in highly vaccinated, areas to begin with. So there's this kind of, well, do we kind of stir the pot and then make everyone and say that everyone has to be vaccinated when they already are, and just piss people off because we're making a mandate? Or do we kind of just just hope that everyone gets their vaccination if they're coming in? And, we aren't requiring people to come back. So I think that's also part of it. There's definitely, I would say, more than half that have elected to work 100% remote. And for now, we are going to honor that. And so, I don't think we're at a point where, we are expecting people to come back yet. And, and I don't think we will be on, at that point either. I think in our industry, we see that a lot of our competitors are offering full remote options. If we decided that, everyone had to come back in and then everyone had to get a vaccination, that would make us less competitive. And, as I mentioned before, about talent, the last thing we want to do is be less competitive. So for now, we're holding off from any of the mandates, but it also plays into the fact that, we are still a very hybrid company that is still mostly working remotely. So it's almost irrelevant.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Rosalba.
Yeah, so for us, it's not irrelevant. For us, it's a requirement of the job. Obviously, we run healthcare facilities, so it is a requirement to be vaccinated. It's that simple. And then in terms of the two-tier, we're not doing that. We're working on a hybrid basis. If you're not a medical provider, who obviously has to be 100% in person, but all other administrative staff is on a hybrid schedule.
Okay, great. So maybe a year ago, we had a CFO panel discussion. It was sort of a round, rather than a panel, it was a roundtable discussion. And one CFO said that traditionally accountants would be traveling to their client sites and that precious private financial documents could not be uploaded to the cloud. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic happens, everybody's working in their pajamas from home, and these financial documents are perfectly fine in the cloud. I sort of have two questions based on that. One, are there any other sort of innovations or changes to your business protocol? And so that's question number one. Let me start with that and see who might like to answer that.
I mean, I'll jump in. I'm not going to really answer the question. I'm just going to address a funky thing that I see going on right now.
Please.
As there is a return to the office, and let's call it, 40%, at least in my space, are back in the office. Now, when you're congregating for a meeting, you almost have this sort of hybrid of the hybrid, if that makes sense. You got people in a conference room, you got people Zooming in on the big screen, you got side conversations going on in the conference room. The people who are in Zoom can't really hear what's going on and a little chitter chatter. So in a bizarre way, with RTO going on right now as we speak, it doesn't seem as seamless as the way it used to be when we were 100% working remotely. And I almost feel like we're in this bizarre middle ground right now. And maybe the technology hasn't perfected itself yet. But when I'm calling in from home and I've got a bunch of colleagues sitting in a conference room like Sean is right now, like I see Sean, but I really see Rosalba, I really see Justin, I could see their faces, I could read their reactions. But when there are a bunch of people in the conference room and I'm on Zoom, I can't really see if they're shrugging or if they're raising their eyebrows or just like kind of making faces, whatever that might be. So we're in a weird, bizarre middle ground right now.
Okay. Anyone else want to answer about innovations that were unexpected?
Well, the only thing I would say about that is one of the things that we really had to make sure we teed up was around cybersecurity, because fraud is rampant, right, in the finance world. And so we really needed to make sure that our cybersecurity was top notch. And so that was something that we really spent some time and resources on. And it's critical at any point in time, but it was certainly really critical during the pandemic. So that would be one thing I would say we added. And then, of course, the Microsoft Teams, the Zoom, all those were things that we never used when we were in an office together. So I'm not saying that they were innovative, but for us, they were, as a nonprofit who never used them. So, so that world has changed. But I do agree with Steve's assessment that since the return to office, it's been very difficult to manage that hybrid schedule to the point where we now sort of mandate at least once or twice a month, like in person for everyone, management meetings, because it is very difficult to have part of the people on Zoom and part of the people in the office. So that is a challenge.
Thank you so much. Shan, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, when I joined eBay, this is it must have taken me 2 weeks, let's say, to get everything set up, right? Your laptop, your accesses, your systems, all the things that, you know, you'd want to have access to in a role. It's shocking to me, and we've hired lots of people over the pandemic, how day one, everyone's set up. Right, they've got their laptops FedEx to them, and so just the first day they're sort of up and running and ready to go on Zoom. I was like, well, I mean, you got your laptop already? Do you have all the systems access? Yep, everything taken care of. We're ready to go. So that was a bit, you know, kind of surprising, I'd say, in a way.
Amazing, amazing. Justin?
Well, anecdotally, I think you know, when we went to when we went into kind of this remote world, one of my biggest pet peeves with the company I was with was how much we were printing. Like we would literally spend, I don't know, $20,000 a month on toner and copy paper, right? And we would have these big meetings with the group and go, guys, you know how many forests you're killing, and you know how much this is costing, and you don't need to print this much. You could just stay on your screen, and you don't need to print out every single thing, and nobody would listen because we're an advertising agency. Everybody had to print everything. And then you kind of move to the work from home, and nobody's printing anything because it's their own printer and it's their own stuff. And you know, and finally they discovered that, you know, they didn't have to kind of do that. And I think, you know, what was interesting, I guess, is that you kind of learn what you really need to kind of get the job done. I think that pandemic kind of forced you to do that when you didn't have the luxury of being in offices and, you know, having, you know, printers at your disposal, you know, and things like that. And I think it kind of forced you to be more resourceful. And I thought, you know, for me, that, you know, that was a good thing. You know, save a tree is a good thing. So
it's a great thing. Justin, we got rid of 75% of these huge Xerox printers from the office. The Xerox guys probably hate us, but you know, it's a nice cost.
How are their stock doing?
Good question. So in terms of, Justin, you were talking about fixing the talent issue. What investments did, you know, if you weren't paying money on toner and paper, were you paying more on the talent side? And what additional investments may you have done for your people? My boyfriend works for Salesforce, and he gets a box of cookies every month from, you know, I mean, it's amazing to me. So has there been a greater investment on the human side of things?
Yeah, I definitely, I don't think it's cookies, but that wouldn't be good for our waistlines. But
fair.
But you know, we are, you know, I think we've, you know, I think corporate America, and very recently, has kind of come to terms with, you know, the idea of diversity, and making, you know, ensuring that the workforce, you know, is more diverse. I think, you know, we are actually now taking it seriously. It really does feel like that. You know, and it's been a while, and to be honest, you know, it probably did come from, you know, certain things that happened out of the pandemic, where, you know, there's kind of a wake up call, you know, to America that, you know, things had to get fixed. And so, you know, right now we are doing a lot of that kind of investment, you know, bringing on coaches and, you know, and consultants to help us understand, you know, how do you diversify the workforce? And it isn't just about race, or gender. I mean, it could be from a different background as well, like an industry background, you know, like, do we have to hire, you know, from media, or could we hire from banking, for example? And, you know, it's really kind of looking, you know, at that, you know, and Rosalba talked about, right, you know, no, there are not a lot of female CFOs, you know, that is a problem. And I think, you know, as we, you know, focus on the people issue, it's focusing on how do we correct those kinds of problems. You know, we take that pretty seriously. And I think, you know, to stay competitive as well and to attract good talent, you know, most companies are going to have to kind of address that issue as well.
Well said. Well said. Steve, do you want to jump
Yeah, I
in
would
on
just
that?
add, I would add quickly, the George Floyd tragedy, several months into the pandemic, really drove the racial injustice, racial inequality conversation at State Street more than ever. We were all having the conversations, whereas in the past we may have been a bit more reserved. We put together panels where people share their stories, which they never spoke about to colleagues before. And again, back to my earlier comments, I mean, that was another sort of dynamic of just opening up to each other like we never did before. And now that's having the conversation when the conversation never happened, in the workplace at least. And now the conversation's happening. It's happening on a routine basis with all sorts of panels being set up. It's now translating into goals, performance priorities, metrics, tracking, D&I engagement all over the company. And it's a shame a tragedy like that had to drive this because it was long overdue. But now, and again, it's the ESG agenda too, on top of all of this. We're doing the right thing.
Rosalba, in terms of investing in your people, as well as the social issues that certainly Planned Parenthood has been involved with?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly what Justin and Stephen said, I ditto down the line. I mean, we at Planned Parenthood are very committed to the equity piece. We have a whole department dedicated to it. So that's huge. In addition to that, I would say there are resources that we have put into sort of recruitment and retention, because those are critical pieces, particularly of medical professionals, because as you all know, it's very difficult to recruit medical professionals right now. I think it's difficult to recruit anybody right now, but certainly in the medical field. And so our board made a decision to make sure that there were resources to help us do that. I think the other thing I would say in my last job, one of the things at the height of the pandemic was this sort of concept of hazard pay. I don't like that term. So we called it incentive pay, but we did manage to provide some incentive pay to staff during the height of the pandemic. That was really critical. So there were resources that were sort of reallocated to support staff.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. Sean, anything on the eBay front?
Yeah, I've been proud of the company, and when I look back, I think of my own career, one of the great achievements, I'd say, we spearheaded an investment in the Clear Vision Impact Fund as a result. So historically, we've worked with diverse and minority women-owned banking financial institutions to help us with capital markets activities. So if we're investing, if we need to issue debt or place debt, if we need a bank to help us with derivatives, we do try to include as many financial partners that are diverse and women-owned as we have. And we've done this for the past 5 years since I've been here. This year, we were able to close along with Apple, Comcast, and Constellation Brands, I think, were the anchor investors in the fund that, again, eBay's got a foundation, so it's not by any means a charity, but it is investing in businesses that are women and minority owned. And as now part of our risk committee, we're including KPIs from that fund. Because again, it's not just a question of, a $25 million investment in the fund. It's what is that going to mean in terms of job creation, in terms of minority women directors, board of directors in these companies. What markets are they serving? One of the fascinating things we found out is that we actually have data on what markets, what communities by zip code underserved from a financial perspective or any other perspective. So I think to Steve and everyone's point, it's unfortunate that it took a tragedy, right, to sort of, I think cause a lot of companies to think along those lines. But one, optimistic way, or one kernel of goodness that did come out of it is that we are, I think, just genuinely serious about doing something about this and making a change. And I mean, that's kind of cool.
It's very cool. And I will say that at Baruch, our career offices got a lot more phone calls over the last year of companies specifically wanting Baruch quality talent with the diversity of the student body that we have. And we just continue to promote our hashtag Hire Baruch, whether it's undergraduate, graduate, or alumni, because A, it's the best way to support the network and support the next generation. But B, you are all extraordinary representatives of the diversity of Baruch and the talent that's out there. I have a couple more questions. Given the low overnight interest rates, have CFOs, have you been actively looking towards riskier allocation options for your company cash, for their free company cash for yield enhancement? Have you been willing to take a little bit more risk?
I mean, I'll start because I actually want to hear Steve's answer on this, because I could be the most germane. Look, nobody buys eBay stock because we know how to invest our cash. Like our stock shareholders are not looking to eBay to maximize, the return on our cash. We keep cash as a fortress balance sheet, because of things like the pandemic that just happened, and to give us flexibility to make some moves, from either capital markets or just an inorganic sort of growth perspective, M&A perspective. So no, if we were to lose $1 of the company's cash because we decided to take, a risky investment, that would not be a good outcome for anyone in the finance world.
All right. Steve, I think it's
Yeah,
past you.
Yeah, I think it's no secret that the banks don't like a very low or zero interest rate environment, right? And no surprise with threats of inflation, actually not threats, inflation is playing itself out at the highest levels in many years, with interest rates starting to tweak upward. Bank share prices have experienced a nice ride, a nice upward ride, because literally they're able to maximize the spread income between what they pay out for collecting deposits versus rates on lending. So naturally, a rise in rates is a good thing. A little inflation is a good thing from a banking perspective. From an asset management perspective, when you have this low interest rate environment, you've got this weird dynamic called fee waivers on your cash assets under management. Institutional companies, whether it be like a Ziff Davis or an eBay, that will park cash in money market institutional money market funds. If the rates that they are enjoying or receiving is lower than the fees that they are being charged, you have this phenomenon in a low interest rate environment called cash fee waivers, where asset managers like ourselves waive the fees to your important clients, or all your clients, I should say, and that's a tough financial proposition. So those fee waivers go away when rates start tweaking upward. We welcome this development as long as it's within moderation, clearly.
All right. Thank you for your thoughtful and careful answer. Justin.
Similar to Sean, we're not really a cash focused company. So cash is a nice kind of KPI on the balance sheet, helps improve ratios and whatnot. But I don't think our treasury is that active in kind of trying to find efficiencies within the markets to kind of, squeeze that really last dollar out of it, right? We use our cash for strategic purposes, mostly for M&A. We do enjoy the cheap debt that also helps with our M&A, but we don't really actively, manage cash to that level. And I think that's just the nature of the business. I mean, we're founding our foundation has been, kind of this kind of tech, internet, digital kind of company. I just don't think we really think of cash in that way.
Right. Rosalba, I'll just shift it a little bit for you just in terms of donations over, I want to hear about your risk investment, but how was donations of the last 2 years?
Yeah, so it was mixed. As I mentioned earlier, as a nonprofit, we were able to tap into certain resources because of the pandemic. And so that certainly helped many nonprofits, as well as the ones that I worked with and work with. I think on the other side, there were private donations that sort of fell off, right? Because people were struggling. So I think it was a mix. In terms of the investment piece, I don't have much to add there because as a nonprofit, Justin said it very well. We sort of don't manage that piece to squeeze every single penny out of whatever cash we might have left over. So that's not what we're in the business to do. So I would say that we tend, if there's any cash, we tend not to be risky with donor money.
Right. Well, let us all give an applause emoji to our fabulous panel. Thank you, Steve, Rosalba, Justin, and Sean for joining us and sharing your expertise. I will note, just as we ended on the concept of fundraising, that November 30th is Giving Tuesday. It is CUNY Tuesday, and we are in competition, friendly, of course, with our other CUNY schools to be the number one for alumni donations and number of alumni who have given. I have included a link. You can contribute to Giving Tuesday now, all the way up until Tuesday. So I hope you will all think of that. Shan, I'm not sure if you noticed when you were talking about the $2 billion goal for eBay, I said, we'll just take 1%, we don't need more. Happy to talk to you about that.
Well played, Janet.
Yeah. But we just really would be grateful for your generosity. I have included the link to our CFO network on LinkedIn. I invite you all to join that conversation. If you are looking for finance talent, please post a position there as well, as we do want to support the ongoing professional advancement of our alumni community. Thanksgiving is next week. We are so thankful for all of you being here this evening, for your ongoing loyalty and affection and support for Baruch College. It is wonderful to see you all in this environment. We look forward to seeing each other in person again soon. It probably will remain remote for the next several months, but stay tuned. Shan, you did mention the fact that you have employees across the world. Over the course of the pandemic, one positive result was the creation of our Europe, Middle East, Africa Alumni Network. because folks within that zone are all within the same time zone, and we can now celebrate our 2,000 alumni across that entire area. And we will be having a conversation on December 8th on the international automobile industry with a few automobile executives from Germany, Israel, and possibly the Middle East. So stay tuned for that on December 8th. And I wish you all a wonderful evening. Stay safe, be well, and thank you so much for just being so terrific to the panel. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Janet.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, good night, good night.